first, this week's one-on-one and 10 Iran war interview with Phil Goff. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful, and your wisdom, Phil, on America's war against Iran is sorely needed.
Yeah, thanks, Bomber. It's a pretty grim situation that we've got into, and we're 10 days into the war now. What's incredibly clear from it is that this was a war that the United States entered into without a plan, without any clear objectives, and on premises that were totally false. I guess it takes me back to the time when I was Foreign Minister, and we had the invasion of Iraq under President Bush. And the claim at that stage was that the war met the requirements of the UN Charter and international law because there were weapons of mass destruction. Now, our intelligence people were telling me as minister they had no evidence of weapons of mass destruction still being in Iraq. Hans Blix, who was in charge of an organisation called UNMIVIC,
That's right,
doing the weapons inspections, said to me, Phil, we haven't been able to find any evidence. And lo and behold, what happened? When the invasion happened and they occupied and searched high and low in Iraq, they found no weapons of mass destruction. In this particular occasion, we've had a variety of reasons given by President Trump. One was that he said that, look, they were about to strike us. Well, look, you don't have to be very smart to understand that countries don't attack great powers that have 50 times more military might than they have. It's a little bit like Putin saying, actually, it was Ukraine that started this war. Clearly, there was no intelligence that they were about to strike. The military intelligence from the United States denied that they had any understanding that that was about to happen. Second reason given was this was about regime change. Yeah, so was Iraq, so was Libya. Afghanistan's slightly different because there were justifications for going into Afghanistan. But what we know is that when you try to achieve regime change from outside, you often end up with a regime worse than you had before.
Right.
I was reading General David Petraeus the other day, and he said, without the invasion of Iraq, there would be no ISIS. So when they went into Iraq on false pretenses, they created chaos. They had no plan. They caused a massive increase in terrorism around the world, and literally tens of thousands of people died. So this is a very strange situation where it looks like President Trump has been led by the nose by Netanyahu. Netanyahu has said, look, we know that the Ayatollah is meeting with some key people at his compound on this date. We need to strike now. We need to strike while Iran is weak. This is a war led by Israel, followed by the United States, that has no justification. Yes, it's a terrible regime, but are we going to get anything better at the end of it? We've got the Ayatollah's son, who is more hardline, more pro-nuclear weapon, and more corrupt.
Phil,
so far, the opposite results.
Phil, for almost 40 years, Netanyahu has been claiming Iran is mere moments away from building a nuclear bomb requiring the West to attack Iran. He claimed this in a Knesset speech in 1992. He claimed it in a book in 1995. He claimed it in a US Congress speech in 1996. He claimed it in a congressional delegation in 2009. He claimed it at the UN General Assembly in 2012. He claimed it in a 2015 speech to the US Congress. He claimed it again in another 2018 speech. It again last year during media interviews. No American administration over those 40 years was stupid enough to get conned into a war with Iran, because every single time their CIA geeks and military goons war game out a fight, it always ends in a bloodbath massacre with regional wars, an Iranian civil war, a couple of American capital ships sunk, global energy prices exploding, and a refugee crisis that swamps Turkey. The question I want to ask you is the following. Was the greatest danger from Trump illegally kidnapping the Venezuelan president and annexing the oil the self-belief that he could get away with ignoring the rules-based order?
Yeah, well, look, let's face it. Trump has absolutely trashed the rules-based order. We had a problem before. We've had a problem ever since 1945 because the great powers gave themselves the veto,
Right.
so that you can get 90% of the General Assembly saying this is what we should do, and one country, and it's usually either been Russia or the United States, will veto it.
Yeah.
So it was an imperfect system, but at least it was a system that you could hold up a country's actions against the Charter, against international law, and bring pressure to bear on them. Trump has trashed the system set up by Franklin Delano Roosevelt,
Yes.
and his successor as president. It was a system that worked better than we'd had before.
Yep.
It was still imperfect, but if you don't have the rule of law, you have might is right, and countries that have the power doing whatever they like. And clearly, Trump believes, he's actually admitted it himself. He said the only thing that holds me back from doing anything is my sense of moral standards. Well, sorry, we know what his sense of moral standards are in more ways than one. That's not something good to rely on.
Has Trump horribly miscalculated that Iranian religious zealots could be as bullied and bribed as a corrupt revolutionary government? I mean, by assassinating the Ayatollah, America and Israel have already breached Iran's red lines, haven't they?
Yeah, look, I don't think the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are going to step back. They're not going to surrender. They're not going to surrender unconditionally. These people are bad. They're bad. I make no bones at all about that. But you do not get regime change from airstrikes from the sky. Now, let's just remember what the history of this country is. The first coup against a democratically elected prime minister in 1953 was orchestrated by the British in conjunction with the CIA. They overthrew a democratic government, replaced it with the Tsar. And don't forget, for all of the Iranian protesters that are saying, quite rightly, that this regime is terrible.
Right.
Think back to the Tsar's days. He was a man that was authoritarian. He was a man that locked up and took out of action anyone that dissented from his regime.
Yes.
And they're wanting to put back the same sort of system. Now, look, I hope there is regime change, but it's not going to come in the way that the Americans have tried to organize it. They're organising the Kurds and the Azeris to ethnic minorities within Iran. But what we know, as we found out in Iraq and we found out in Libya, that creates chaos.
Right.
And where you've got chaos, you've got the basis to spread terrorism, criminal activities, people and drug trafficking, you name it. So if you want regime change, there are different ways of going about it. This is not the way to go about it. This will not achieve the objectives that Trump has claimed for it. And now you've got, of course, Rubio saying, oh, it's not about regime change at all. So, look, we keep getting conflicting accounts from the United States. But what we know is that we've got a serious situation that is a war of choice, not a war of necessity, that has not got clear objectives and is likely to leave the world a worse place rather than a better place. One more point on this bomber. Yes, look, they are enriching uranium in Iran. And right from the beginning, we've said that uranium should not be enriched to the level that could create a nuclear bomb.
Yes.
There's no evidence that they've tried to create a nuclear bomb yet, but they've enriched uranium to a level that would make that possible. There was an agreement reached, largely led by the Europeans, in 2018. Trump came in and he trashed it.
Yes.
Left a vacuum. And the Iranians went back to doing what they were without supervision. There were talks going on, supervised by the foreign minister of Oman.
That's right.
He said they were making real progress.
That's right.
Big concessions had been made by Iran. You could have had verification and monitoring to ensure that they couldn't have done that. In the middle of those talks, which can only be seen as bad faith, the attack was launched.
Right.
It took out the leader of Iran and started this war. So, and of course, Donald Trump was telling us in the State of the Union address 3 days before he attacked Iran that he had obliterated the nuclear facilities in Iran. So either he was lying then, or he's lying now, saying that they had to go in because they were making another weapon. None of it adds up. It's all based on falsehoods. It's bad for the world. People are dying. Buildings and infrastructure and etc. are being destroyed. And look, we know that girls' school was taken out by a missile fired by the Americans.
Right.
I heard Trump. I was listening to him. He said, I think the Iranians did it.
Yes.
Hegseth, who is not a man that I have any respect for, was behind the president saying, we're still investigating this.
Come on.
You know, truth may be the first casualty in a war, but truth was lost long before this war started when it comes to the Trump administration. You cannot believe a word that Trump says. Every speech is riddled with falsehoods.
Right.
And that is a tragedy for a country that should be the leader of the free and democratic world.
Preach. Killing the Ayatollah would be as big an impact on believers as assassinating the Pope. Hasn't Trump and Netanyahu set in motion a terrible terrorism blowback here?
Well, he creates the risk that people that are against the Iranian regime will come in behind the regime because of the devastation being done to their country by outsiders. So, you know, it could well be counterproductive. I mean, I believe that 80% of Iranian people, I've been to Iran a couple of times, don't want the theocratic regime, don't want the dogma and the ideology that the regime is imposing on them. But you will not get the change that we would all like to see in the manner in which Israel and the United States has gone about it. We may well get the reverse.
How can we criticize Russia for their illegal war on the Ukraine yet stay silent when America and Israel launch an illegal war on Iran?
Well, that's absolutely right. You can't say I believe in the rule of law when it's the Russians that are breaking the rule of law and the United Nations Charter, but it's okay if the Americans do it.
Right.
And the irony of this situation, Bomber, is that this war will be helping Russia more than anyone else.
Right.
Why?
Right.
Because already Trump has lifted the sanctions against India purchasing oil from Russia. And now he's talking about lifting the sanctions altogether.
Yeah.
The Russians will keep the war in Ukraine going on the basis of the money they'll make out of their oil sales at the hugely inflated price that oil is currently selling for. Again, totally counterproductive if you want a decent world and a world that stops the sort of aggression that we've seen from Russia against the Ukrainians. And if we say that the Iranian leadership is corrupt and evil and awful, what do we say about this man, Putin, that murders his opponents, Navalny, and is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in a war that isn't justified?
Yeah.
So, you know, this Putin goes to the United States, to Alaska, gets welcomed on the red carpet and a double handshake from the president, a totally different standard that he's holding Putin to than what he's holding the Iranian regime to.
Finally, Phil,
please be consistent.
Finally, Phil, you were sacked as UK High Commissioner by the Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, for daring to be critical of Trump. What do you think of this government's appalling acquiescence to America? And how should New Zealand be using its global platform?
Yeah, well, I guess what I feel is that history will be on my side on this one.
Yeah,
what I said about Trump, the question I raised about Trump, does he understand history? Clearly he doesn't, or he doesn't care about it.
Yeah.
If he understood history, then he would not be appeasing Putin over Ukraine. If he understood history, he would not be trying to get regime change in the manner that he's trying to do. He doesn't, not only does he not understand history, he doesn't care. He cares about one thing, his own power and his own enrichment. And after that, whether this might be good. You know, if Iran didn't have oil, would there be a war? If Venezuela didn't have oil, would there have been the removal of Maduro as the president? And everybody knows the answer to those questions.
What do you think we should be doing with our voice right now, Phil?
Well, I think we should be doing what traditionally I believe New Zealand should always do. We have to speak up for our interests and we have to speak up for our values. Now, if I was foreign minister, I wouldn't be quite using the terms that I'm using on your show tonight and I'm using in public, but I'm not foreign minister.
That's right.
I'm citizen Goff and I can say what I bloody like. And I can say that regardless of who I might offend and what I'm saying. I will keep saying it as long as I believe that it's the truth. But we could, yes, you've got to behave differently when you're foreign minister. But you should not put up with what Trump is doing because silence is complicity. And the thing that really made me angry about Peters was that when President Trump suggested that other countries that were in Afghanistan, which includes New Zealand,
Yes.
were too cowardly to be on the
Yes.
front line.
Yes.
I went to the funerals of the New Zealand service people that died in that country. I know the hurt and the insult that was to those families of those people that died for their country and for us in Afghanistan. Even Starmer spoke out and said, that's wrong and that's insulting. We didn't have a word from Winston Peters, not a word of criticism. Now, I would have thought that when something is as egregiously wrong as that and as insulting as that, you would at least stand up for your dead service people and say that is not true. They died on the front line. They died in a fight against terrorism. They died for their country, and we will not tolerate that sort of insult against their memory. That's what I would have expected, and that's what I would have done as foreign minister without a word of apology for it.
Always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you, Conrad. We'll see you again very shortly.
Thanks, Bomber.
Cheers. Bro.